There we go. Welcome, Jo Caudron. We are live.
Hey, well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome in our, I think, 20th will be around like our 20th coffee break. Um, Today we will talk about everything goes hybrid. What does that mean? Now,
Well, as it says, it's already hybrid. It was something that was happening for the actually since we became more and more digital. But it took a while. It took over 2 decades for businesses to realize that alongside their traditional channels or places where they did things, that digital would create new places, new channels. And of course, if you look at retail, for instance, you had old shops had just physical stores, and then we started with e-commerce, and that was like multi-channel, and it became omni-channel and so on. So managing different channels at the same time, making that a journey, a customer journey, for instance, was something that you could have partly in the physical world and then go back to the online world and continue, and then you have a problem with your what you buy, and then you go back to the physical world. So these kind of things were already in the making. But what we saw with COVID in 2000 is that on many levels, because education was getting hybrid, and healthcare was getting hybrid, and retail, of course, but also work was getting hybrid. And what happened with COVID is that it all went like a pendulum from mainly still the focus on the old channel, work equals going to a workplace. The pendulum did shift, and at least for all knowledge workers, we were forced into this purely digital channel. And in the first weeks and months of COVID and the lockdowns, people said, well, once COVID will be gone, we will be glad to go back to the physical space. But as it took longer and longer that we remained in that at least partly virtual environment, people also started to see the benefits. As with e-commerce, I mean, you have benefits if you combine both the physical and the digital space. So that was the same with work. And so that's why we probably after about a year, we saw seeing the first signs of a lot of companies saying, even when COVID will be over, we will probably keep the mix. So, and again, it was already written in the stars, it would happen, but COVID just accelerated as it did with so many other things.
yeah. Now, in the title is everything goes hybrid. That seems not to be the case for all organizations. Like I read that 44% of the organizations, they have the opportunity to do something hybrid, but they are not doing it.
Yeah.
So
Yesterday I read an article about the chief of AI at Apple is resigning after 4 years being at Apple, and the main reason is that he and his team can no longer work hybrid because there's the new return to office policy from Apple saying, well, we all should come back. It's only 2 or 3 days a week. And still he says, well, that's no longer what the environment I want to work in, so I quit. So I think you're right. A lot of companies, and to be honest, I'm a bit surprised. There are profiles of companies that I run a consulting firm. I work for different types of companies. There are companies of which that I predicted they will go back to the office from the moment they can, but they introduced a remote work policy. And others that you think they are very modern and so on, they are a bit reluctant. So it's difficult to predict. But I think he has about half probably is very eager on getting as many people back to the office and forcing them if necessary. And others, they embrace it. But it's not a coincidence that we have the Great Resignation. Many people, it's not just about a wake-up call and a work-life balance that was newly found. It's also that people say, I do not want to go back to whatever headquarters and commute every day for 2 or 3 hours in traffic. So there's a direct link. So people in the war for talent, if as a company you believe you want the best people and you do not provide hybrid work, you have an issue.
yeah, yeah, I totally agree. How important is hybrid work in being happy at work?
Well, it's hybrid work is important in being happy at work, but also at home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a bit of a challenge because we have to be very careful that the hybrid situation where you can work partly from home and actually partly from the office and partly not from the office, because for us not working in the office doesn't mean necessarily that you work from home. There are other situations too. But the problem is that it becomes like almost a mechanical thing. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you can work from home. That's maximum. And then on Tuesday and Thursday, you need to be in the office. And maybe the other team is then in the office on the other days of the week so that you can have a smaller office. But it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because you should be in the office when what you have to do in your work requires you to be in the office. And why do you want to be in the office? Because there's better coffee? I doubt that, but because you meet with people, because you connect, because you interact. And of course, we talk now, but it's virtual, and I've done, uncountable amount of Zoom calls and team meetings. But it's not the same as seeing your colleagues and having a creative brainstorm or having a difficult talk. So every time you go to the office, the purpose of that session, that commute should be that you do something that has more impact and value when you do it in the office. So if you go to the office on Monday, because that's in your regulations, and on Monday you open up your laptop and you start working for 8 hours with a headphone, and then you leave the office at 6 in the evening, that's pretty stupid. So you need to find a mix. When do people want to work at home? When it's better for the kind of work they do. They want to stay focused. Maybe if they have a kid that's sick or whatever. So it is key not just to look at the mix between working from home and working from maybe a local hub and working from the office as something which is, well, on Monday this and on Tuesday that. No, it should be linked to what you have to do. And that requires from your line managers and HR, of course, that they interact in a way, and in logistics and the people from facilities, that you interact. And it's not just a rule, you have to be there 2 days and those are the days. No, you have to be there when the job requires this. And if you then, if you can work at home when you have to focus, and if you can go to the office and have lunch with your colleagues and sit on the terrace in the sunny weather that as it is today, then you will be happy. It will be effective. You will go out with a smile. You will have better results than yet another Zoom call and a headache afterwards. So the happiness is related to the relevance of the place where you do things, in my opinion.
Yeah. And what do you think? How big are the chances of organizations just ignoring hybrid work?
Well, they are there, of course, and what they will have is they will or maybe lose good people, or they will not attract the next generation of good people, because there is no real argument to be made that it wouldn't work. And certainly from a company's perspective, if you look at, all of these companies that could continue to work at full speed during the COVID crisis, like large consultants and so on, they all report better years. The performance in 2020 was better than an average year. The performance in 2021 was better than an average year. Still, they had to let go of these people. They had to trust these people. They had to let them free. It was not like office hours that you could control. That was all of these kind of objections that typically people had in the past about not working in the office. Apparently, if you just looked at the results, it was not valid, all of these objections. The problem is, of course, that people, well, they need other people. Mm-hmm. So if it's binary, only work from home and alone, people are not happy. Mm-hmm. So, to answer to your question, the companies that will not allow it, they don't really have good arguments for not allowing it, unless there is typically like you cannot do your job without being physically together with your colleagues, and then people will understand that, of course. But if they don't have these arguments, well, they will just lose talent. It's very simple. So in the long run, they will shoot in their own foot.
Yeah. And the reason why they do it, is it control? Is it just like the fact of choosing the easiest way and go back to the old?
It is control. It is a lack of trust. It is not believing, although the numbers are there in many research, that you can see that it is not less effective. Mm-hmm. So from a profit perspective, it's wiser to have more work from home or not in the office than it is to force everyone back to the office. But the thing is, of course, that people and companies have legacy. And even with the numbers written down in a report, well, they still fall back into the old reflex of I need to be. Well, actually, I think there's maybe another reason. So it's a control thing, but it's an interesting. It just pops into my mind now. It's not necessarily the CEO that wants people back. It's the middle management. Because the middle management, a lot of the reason of their raison d'être, their purpose in a company is to be in between and to translate what's happening in a physical office, and they are then the head of that physical group, and they actually go up to another meeting room and they report to their peers, and that goes back to the CEO. So in an environment where everything is more flat and there's more direct lines of communication through technology, these people are afraid of losing control because they are the ones going saying, well, these are the results of my team. But if you see the results in the day-to-day work, in the outputs, I mean, so I think a lot of the barriers are with people in somewhere in the hierarchy of the company, for which their purpose will be lost unless they reinvent themselves too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a good middle manager probably doesn't have this issue, but someone that is really there just as a gateway between a lot of people and upwards in the organization, they have a problem.
Yeah.
So they are blocking it now.
Yeah. On the conference in June, we have Shane Snow. He will talk about how to create a hybrid dream team. Now, when I ask that question to a lot of people, they don't know the answer. I guess you might have some ideas how to create a hybrid dream team.
Well, I think a dream team should, by definition, be hybrid. And we have been doing this. I'm in the digital space for almost 30 years. And so the first things we did was everyone in one office and then in a couple of offices. And we had difficulties. With one of my companies, The Reference, years ago, we had, I think, 5 offices dispersed in the country, 4 in Ghent and 1 in Brussels, or even 2 in Brussels. And then we had one in Paris, and we had one in Munich, and in London even. So that was big. And these people could not work together because we didn't have the tools and the communication. We had the internet, but still it was not in the same way. But with the latest companies, Copernia, which is a consulting firm, it exists now for like 12 years, I think. From day one, we had people from all around the country. And we didn't have, for the first, I think, 4 or 5 years, we didn't have an office. Actually, we met every week at least once in the Pain Quotidien in Ghent. And first, at the beginning, we were with like 4 or 5, and after a while, we was really starting to disturb the other guests on a Monday. So we learned, we had just tools and ways of interacting and reporting and assigning tasks to people and working together. That already covered not always being together in the same office. And then we got an office in Dubai. But we use the same resources and people, and knowledge that goes from Belgium to Dubai and the other way around. So we had to even improve that more. So we had a toolkit for that. So I think, again, it's really up to when do I want to see my colleagues? And if I can't for these tasks, because it's not about a job, it's about tasks in a specific job. If a certain task requires me to be physically somewhere else, then I should be there. If it requires me to be isolated and focused at home, then I should do that. But there's always this in between. Sometimes I do not want to see my colleagues, but I do not want to work from home because my kids are at home and my partner is making phone calls. And maybe it is, I just do not want to be alone. So then maybe I should go to a space like a co-working space. Where I see other people, where I can have I can have a sandwich or I can have a drink together with other people, even if they are not my direct colleagues, but I start to recognize them so I can interact and relate. So you don't build a hybrid dream team. You have a dream team in itself of people that love to do the job, and then you just give them hybrid tools. You give them hybrid freedom. Of course, imagine every Monday, which is the case in our company now, you ask people to come to the office. Why? Just because you can eat together and talk a little bit and you have some management meetings, that a part of the team that says, I don't want to come. I have the freedom not to come. Well, that would be counterproductive. They should come. You can even force them to come in that case, because that task, connecting to people, requires them to come to the office. So they should be there. But not because it's Monday. But because you do things on Monday that requires people to meet other people.
You are very passionate about transformation, about innovation, about change. Where is that drive coming from?
I have no clue. I must have been like that as a kid. I know
Yeah.
I had my first. Actually, I had an organization at 12. I made a monthly magazine at 12. Nobody knew there was a kid behind it. It was about astronomy and these kind of things. And
Yeah.
I had about like 150 subscribers, which is actually nothing. But as a kid, that was quite impressive. So, I mean, I don't have entrepreneurs as parents. My mother was a nurse, and my father was a mailman. So that's not really something to rely on if you want to start a business. I had my first computer at 14. But by the age I had to make a decision to study, 18, I said, computers is fine. I just use them. I don't want to know what's in them. I know what's in them as an amateur. So I decided to do something else. But at this basis, I don't know. But I was interested in computers, and I was interested in sci-fi, and I was interested in making music and all of these kind of things. So actually, from early on, I thought about the future.
Uh-huh.
And then after some failures in my first business steps or my first steps in my business career, I discovered the internet and said, well, this is interesting. What will that bring to the world? And I started thinking about it, and it transformed the world. And then social media came along, and mobile, and wow, the metaverse, and all of these things come along. And I just, as already as a kid, I look at something, I think, what will that do to the world?
Yeah.
Now I make a living out of it because customers come to us and they say, well, damn, we have the crisis in Ukraine. What will that do to our business? And then we just do this, but now as consultants, what will that do to your business? And
Yeah.
then we
Yeah.
make a scenario. So it's actually it's a dream job. And then
Yeah.
you attract dream people, dream teams.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I see, I see. I feel the curiosity in you, the like the drive, yeah, like getting rid of status quo, like so
No, I
something.
don't want to get rid of status quo. Status quo is disappearing by itself. And
Yeah,
what I try
yeah,
to do for myself and for my clients is find a new status quo for a while, because you can't run a business without a status quo.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you have to realize the status quo is temporarily,
yeah,
and then it will disappear. I mean, status quo, as like in the last 75 years, we had something like the globalization, and we had just in time and a supply chain that just functioned. From COVID on, it was completely fucked up. The status quo of buying something in China and having it in a container, and 3 weeks later it's in Antwerp in the harbor. Forget it. It's unpredictable. You can't build a business on that assumption anymore. So what is then the answer? Well, finding a new status quo.
yeah. Absolutely. Now you created also with anywhere. You created like kind of boxes, like
Yeah,
let's call it.
that's one way
Yeah.
of looking at it. Pots, we call them pots. We call them pots.
Okay. Can you explain a little bit what's
Yeah.
the idea behind it?
Well, the idea actually came out of my previous book. I've written several books,
Uh-huh.
5, I think, by now, and I'm working on a 6th one. And this one, the previous one, was written, I think, or was published a couple of months before COVID. The world is round, and it depicts a world. I mean, it starts from some of the challenges that we were facing, are still facing, like, I mean, where we live and work, and what work is, and climate change, and many things that confuse people, that scare people, that creates unrest in society. And what I wanted to do in the book was create scenarios, write a future vision on different levels for different kind of things about mobility and about what work is and where work would take place and so on. And these scenarios, I've written them in a distant future. Well, not so distant. It was situated in 2030.
Mhm.
And I think the book was published somewhere mid-October 2019. So that was a decade later. And of course, in March 2020, 6 months later, COVID hit the world. And many of the scenarios were a reality from overnight, basically. Like work from home and all of these things I described, less traffic on the roads. And so instead of having to wait for a decade to see whether it would happen spontaneously, it will have happened overnight in a forced way, but still. And then there's David Bintijn, who is one of the co-founders, together with Gilles Messine. So we are 3
Uh-huh.
from Anywhere. And David, he was also for years in the same business as I was, the digital space. But he got out of one of his companies. He had got some spare time, some money. And one day, walking in the Vlaamse Ardennen, where we both live, he said, I'm going to start a business on that idea. Okay. So that actually was the origin. Then it took a long path of well, coming from an idea, migrating to another idea, into what it is eventually what it became, and that is a flexible solution for remote work nearby where you live.
Mhm.
What does that mean? It's a combination of hardware. So we have physical pods,
Mhm.
and together with a service layer and technology.
Mhm.
Now, why is that important? Because the service layer, the platform, and the technology that could resemble a bit something like Airbnb or Uber, but it's not like we just have software that people can book a flexible place in the neighborhood. No, no, we also have the flexible spaces ourselves. So we have developed a very innovative technology that allows us to put a pot in a home of someone, in the garden of someone, for instance, not in a home but in a garden, in 1.5 hours. So it's
Okay.
completely it's flexible. It's very, I mean, if people check it out on the website, I think it's very nice looking. It's like these hexagrams. You can have different shapes with it. And in 1.5 hours, I mean, we can just pass through your door, go through your house and put it in your garden. It's completely circular. It's locally sourced. It's locally produced. And you have an office spot for one person, maybe for two, but you can't buy it because we actually rent it out
Okay.
to the employer and the employee uses it. Now, this is for people who want it at home, but we have like many cities, they approach us and they say, well, we want to put them in public spaces, not just one, but maybe like 15,
Mhm.
so that people can and come and work there. So that's why it's a combination of the hardware. We control actually that we have the patents and we control the technology for the hardware. It's remote controlled with an app and so on. It's very funky with LED lights and all of these kind of modern things. But at the same time, it's a service model and a platform in an as a service story for the employers, and they can put it into their benefit plans. They can put it into their well, when they talk about the package. I don't want a car, but I want a home pod, or I want to have access to pods in the neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
It becomes now part of the discussions.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's
that's a
very
bit,
nice. Yeah,
anyways.
very nice, agile
Yeah,
idea.
and very sustainable because I mean, you work for a company, you have a pot in your home, you
Yeah.
resign from the company. The company says, like with a leasing car, the problem is, well, what do we do with the car? You just retrieve it. What do we do with the pot? If it's like a fixed garden office, yeah, that's a problem. We just send our team back in, they disassemble it, put it in a truck, and 1 hour and 1 hour later, 1.5 hour later, they are. I mean, there's no more trace of a pot in the garden,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
put it somewhere else because it's very completely reusable.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, in your book, in that book, The World is Round, you mention like round is better. Can you explain that?
So well, I mentioned what?
Round is better. Yeah.
Round
You're.
is better. Yeah, yeah, that's a metaphor, of course, because one of the problems in the physical space that we have created, because we had technology to overcome it, is that we have dispersed essential functions in our lives.
Uh,
Since the Second World War, we created a societal model where work and where we live is not nearby. Actually, you live in the space or the place where you think is the nicest place to live or where I can afford a house, and you work where you find the best job. I mean, I live in the Vlaamse Ardennen and I work maybe for in Brussels. I don't work in Brussels, but sometimes I do work in Brussels. Now, my kids, they go to school in yet another place. And the best restaurants are yet in another place, and best way of the best shops are yet in another place. And all of these places, I do connect with mobility, with a car. Now, that was an incredible invention after the Second World War because that allowed me. I was born in a small village somewhere nearby Dendermonde. And in that small village, there was nothing. If I would have been born 100 years ago, the only options I had in my life was the jobs available in that village. I mean, nothing. But because I could travel from that small village to Dendermonde, there was a college, and then to Ghent to go to university, and so on. So because I had the mobility in my life, I could actually pick and make the best choices for my personal development. That was a very good thing. But the downside was that today we have a world where people live in neighborhoods and there's nothing going on in the neighborhood except for sleeping. And there are neighborhoods in cities where there's nothing going on except for offices. And if you then go to cities like Paris, I just came out of Paris, or you go to Barcelona or to other cities, they always kept their hybrid mix a bit. It's not a coincidence that Paris is talking about the 15-minute city because they don't have to become it. They have always been it. If you live in Paris and you work in Paris and you're not stupid enough to get a car, everything. I mean, with now with these mobile, the electric scooters from Bird and Lime and all of these brands, I mean, they bring you everywhere in 15 to 20 minutes. So the idea of round is what we have to do is to bring the functions back together. So work and healthcare and entertainment and all of these things should be closer together. Now, of course, if you live in a village, you won't have all of the shops, but that's okay because you have e-commerce. And if you live in the countryside, you don't have Microsoft here, but that's okay because you can work for Microsoft remotely. So because of technology, we can bring those functions back together. So I'm not saying that we did something stupid. We did something incredible because we could emancipate and make good choices in our lives because we could pick regardless of the location, and we just, I mean, connected it through mobility, which is incredible. But then, of course, mobility got stuck, and we couldn't build here or construct there anymore. And so we knew there was pressure on the system. And now with COVID, and then now with the Ukraine crisis, this is getting accelerated in urban planning. I mean, new city developments, they mix functions again. That's for the first time in 75 years that they don't say, well, this is 500 units, but only for living. And then we have 5 kilometers down the way, we have industry, and then we have a bit further, we have offices. And the only way to get there is to buy a car. That's why round is the closest distance to everything. There's a reason why every old village is round, except maybe in the United States, but they don't have old villages. So every historic village in Europe is round. Of course, in our evolution after the Second World War, we couldn't do that because there were so many new things and they were everywhere. So we had to go dispersed. But now, because of technology and attitude, we go back round, at least. Not completely, but more than it has been for the last 75 years.
Yeah. You are a consultant in companies. What's your major advice for to be future proof?
Yeah, basically, to put it bluntly, the major advice is the old normal, it's gone. The status quo is fucked up completely. Is this the end of the world? Absolutely not. But it's absolutely the end of many of the assumptions that we took for granted for many, many decades. For instance, a globalized world with a just-in-time economy, with a supply chain that functions. It doesn't function anymore. We have to find localized alternatives. We have to accelerate towards energy transition, towards circular, access to raw materials. There is no access to raw materials. It's blocked. So if we are more circular, then probably we can create a more sustainable, long-term new model. So my advice today is that if you are still waiting for the old normal, wake up. It will not come. You have to go for what I call, and I'm working on a new book, and that might even be the title of the book. You have to go to what I call the new equilibrium. The balance is disturbed now. Just the idea of trillions of euros that we have burned the last 2 years in mitigating COVID, putting money in a war, which is not over yet. The climate disasters, just to imagine, 1 out of 10 homes in the US was damaged last year alone. 1 out of 10 last year because of climate disasters. So these are trillions of euros that we have to start putting somewhere in our balance sheet of society and a company. So that means that the rules for tomorrow will be different. So if you're still waiting until you get your rule book from last decade and say, well, let's continue where we left off when COVID started, forget it. So that means that you have to start looking at what is happening all around us. Digital disruptions, yeah, they're still there. And climate disruptions, they are coming. Geopolitical disruptions, well, we just witnessed one, and so on. And then we see all of these changes or all of these disruptions, and then we have to ask ourselves, what could the future look like? And the more you do it, the more you can say, well, for instance, I can imagine a world where people do not own cars. We work for the car industry. I can now tell them, and they will say, yeah, we can also slowly start to imagine a world where people will not own cars, but we will still make mobility, right? Yes, but it will be different. But it's like, if you thought that having a hybrid work policy was different to digest for some CEOs, well, imagine this one.
Yeah, there's one viewer who asked is if the session is recorded. Yes, it is recorded because he really liked your remark about the middle management.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's not mine. I read it somewhere, so I shouldn't claim it.
yeah,
But I think it's big part of the truth,
yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. Thank you very much, Jo, for your enthusiasm. Thank you very much for
Yeah,
being here.
thanks for asking me.
Keep doing yeah, the transformational work, and yeah, let's meet soon.
In real life.
Yeah.
Jim, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.